Good morning, New York, and welcome to the Jerusalem Post's second annual conference, Fighting for the Zionist Dream. We'd like to invite our keynote speaker. He doesn't really need an introduction, but let's suffice to say that while our current government might be facing some tough decisions, former Prime Minister Ehud Olmert has already had to make some. Whether it was the Second Lebanon War in 2006, Operation Cast Lead in the Gaza Strip in 2009, or what's been attributed to Israel in September of 2007 with the bombing of a nuclear reactor in Syria, as well as peace negotiations with the Palestinians, Olmert led Israel through a critical period, one from which many believe the state emerged even stronger. That is why it is with great pleasure that I ask you to join me in welcoming our former Prime Minister, Ehud Olmert.
Thank you very much. Good morning. It looks like this hall is more crowded this year than last year. And recalling how many were against me last year, I'm getting scared from the outskirts. I mean, distinguished members of the Israeli cabinet, former chief of staff, General Ashkenazi, former head of Mossad, General Meir Dagan, former head of the Israeli intelligence, General Amos Yadlin, Professor Dershowitz, my good friend, and many of the distinguished participants and speakers, and of course the Jerusalem Post people and distinguished guests. First of all, I'd like to say a word about Jerusalem Post. Jerusalem Post has gone through some changes over the years. And I must say that while I don't always agree with the basic attitude of some of the editors of the Jerusalem Post on some of the issues, as it happens, the basic approach and the service of the Jerusalem Post to the positions of the majority of Israelis and the majority of Jews is much greater now than it ever was in the history of this paper, which is one of the original papers that were published in the State of Israel. So I think that this conference, which has started first time a year ago, and which seems to gather momentum, and I'm sure will be much bigger. We'll have to look for Radio City Hall, I think, next time, because of the number of guests that will come, I think is a good testament to the influence, to the presence of the Jerusalem Post and the very devoted work of the people of Jerusalem Post, the publishers, the owners, the editors, the reporters, the columnists of the Jerusalem Post, in bringing forth a variety of opinions and attitudes coming from Israel at this time, which, as Mr. Katz said already, is a time that calls for important decisions on behalf of the Jewish people and the State of Israel. Now, as you know, we had in the last half a year 2 elections. One, perhaps less important, took place here in America. You know, we are very modest people. And one, which was very significant, took place in the State of Israel. And strangely enough, the elections in America ended up with what was anticipated by most people, that the incumbent President Obama was reelected. I don't know whether some people like it, don't like it. I have to say personally, I thought before, and I think now that the two candidates that were running in America were good friends of Israel, both Romney and President Obama. And I think that the visit of President Obama in the State of Israel was a very successful visit, which I think was a good opportunity for the President to make a very friendly and warm statement to the people of Israel on behalf of the United States of America, not just as a personal position, but also on behalf of the United States of America, for which he is the right man to speak, which was very encouraging for us. We also had elections in Israel. And I want to say something right from the outset. I pray, as all of you, and I'm sure as all of the citizens of Israel, that this government will be successful, will do the right things to cope with the enormous economic pressures, and will also deal with the other issues adequately, effectively, with vigor and with wisdom. I trust that they will do every possible effort, and I have faith in their ability to deal with these issues. Therefore, I will do what I always do when speaking to you. I will not criticize the Israeli government. One of the ministers sitting here told me that it's not appropriate to criticize the government overseas. It's all right if you criticize the government in Israel. I said, yes, but when you criticize the government in Israel, after 2 minutes, it's spread all over the world anyway. So what's the big difference? But, people like when you come overseas and you stand on the platform and there are so many thousands of overseas citizens listening to you, particularly when you are a former prime minister of your country. They don't feel comfortable listening from you, words which may be understood to criticize the government of Israel. So I'm not going to do it. However, I knew I could feel that, when I'll say however, you'll start to laugh. No, for the wrong reason this time. I want to share with you some of my thoughts and perceptions and of the understandings that I have about what needs to be done. My positions, not criticizing the government, not supporting the government, not dissenting from the positions of some of the ministers. In fact, I think that there is something very refreshing in this new government. The emergence of young newcomers into politics like Yair Lapid and Naftali Bennett is, I think, a dramatic breakthrough that must be received with great enthusiasm and joy. Young people who did very well outside politics, who could do very well, continue to do very well outside politics, decided to enter into this not so comfortable arena, to put it mildly, particularly not in Israel, as you can imagine, and to try and bring a change. I think that we should welcome them with satisfaction and best wishes that they will help bring this energy, this dynamics, this enthusiasm that they brought with them from the outside, and that they will inject this into the veins of all the other ministers so that this will be a government with much greater energy in everything that it does on matters which are crucial to the State of Israel. Now, I read, and I read in the last few days some comments by different personalities. I want to say something which hopefully may make some of you happier and more relieved. I think that the strategic situation of the State of Israel at this time is perhaps better than it was in many, many years, and that there is not a serious strategic danger to the well-being of the State of Israel, and that in the next maybe 5 to 10 years there is not a danger that Israel will be forced into a military confrontation, ground confrontation, comprehensive confrontation of the likes that we have experienced in the past. This is my personal assessment, which is not maybe congruent with what some people, including from the defense establishment, were saying in the last few weeks. There is not any Arab country at this point which threatens the existence of the State of Israel and which can carry on a comprehensive ground and air war, similar to what we had to deal with in the past, at the present time and in the foreseeable future. Neither Egypt nor Syria or Lebanon. Certainly Jordan, which is having a very good and stable peace relations with Israel, just as Egypt has, by the way. It is true that some of these countries are not as they used to be. One can be somewhat discontent with the change in the general attitude of the Egyptian government and the fact that a fundamentalist, extremist religious party has taken over in Egypt. That's what happens when you have democratic elections. Sometimes the government is made of people that you don't quite agree with, and certainly this is not a development which was desired by many in the West. But when we look at this government and we look at the constraints with which this government is dealing, we must reach the inevitable conclusion that their priority is to try and make the best that they can in order to stabilize the country and to provide the needs of more than 80 million people, which are growing rapidly in unbelievable pace, rather than to lose entirely, completely, dramatically the support of all the outside world if they will depart from the basic fundamental agreements. And the first and foremost is the peace agreement with the State of Israel, which will almost rid them overnight from everything that they need in order to be able to continue the government in Egypt with a degree of stability and approval. And that's why this same government which is not originally and naturally the friendliest to the State of Israel, has been very helpful in bringing a ceasefire when we had this last encounter with the Palestinians of Hamas in Gaza. They were the ones that made the ceasefire possible, no one else. In spite of what was presumed to be their close relations with Hamas, they still didn't want this encounter to take more than it took, because all expressions of instability and confrontations are not a priority in the policy. Very interesting. Syria is a major problem. It's a major problem because we don't know who the revolutionaries are, and we don't know who will emerge eventually as the one that will control Syria. I think that Bashar Assad is done. It's a matter of time, and perhaps a short time. Not as short as we have anticipated a year ago when we thought that he will not last the year 2012, but I think that he is done. A leader that kills close to 100,000 of his own citizens in such brutality has no right to remain in power, and he will be overthrown by all the different revolutionary forces that are now gathering up in Syria. Who they are precisely, what is their political platform, what will be their agenda, what will be their policies, how they will deal with Israel, is a question that remains to be seen. One thing is certain, that they will not be able overnight to take over, to resolve all the different conflicts amongst them, and to take charge of Syria to the degree that then they will be able to look at Israel and think of what they do in order to express perhaps their discontent with the present relations with the State of Israel. Therefore, I also join in I bring in Syria into this equation that I've outlined before, that Syria is not a candidate to fight a comprehensive ground, air, or war, a traditional war against the State of Israel. And I can carry on and on and on. The bottom line is that Israel can afford itself to change priorities, because from a security point of view, there are only two major problems. One is terror. It's more a potential than a present issue, because, as we all know, the nature, the intensity of this threat has changed dramatically over the last 7 years, since the second war in Lebanon. I know that some people thought that the war in Lebanon, the second war in Lebanon, was a failure. I think that had all the wars that we fought in the history of the State of Israel would have resulted with 7 years of complete ceasefire without one bullet shot from across the border, we would have considered them to be the greatest strategic successes of the Israeli army. And that's how I consider the second war in Lebanon. You can't argue with facts. We declared, when we responded to the provocation of the Hezbollah, that we want to bring peace or peaceful atmosphere to the north part of Israel, and that's what we did. The fact that they have weapons and so on and so forth is true, but they had before. What they don't have is a desire to use these weapons, because they know what the reaction of Israel may be based on what it was in 2006, which to this day they still suffer from when they even think about it, let alone the fact that Nasrallah is still living underground, deep underground, maybe deeper than the centrifuges of the Iranians in Tehran. And he knows why. It's true, by the way, that my government was very anxious to bring peace between us and the Palestinians. I'll come back to this issue in a moment. Of course, you don't think that I would forget it. But you have to admit that in modern times, there was no government in the history of the State of Israel which did more to beat the terrorists both north and south as the government that I had the privilege to be a prime minister of did. We did it in the north with the Hezbollah. We did it in the south with the Cast-Lead operation. There may be arguments, there are sometimes arguments, whether in some instances the manner in which we approached the terrorists was exactly according to the laws of humanity that are exercised, of course, by all the others that preach to us. But there was not a question, not a comment, not a resolution in any UN institution that criticized the right of Israel to respond to the provocations of Hezbollah and the Hamas. And we did it without hesitation, in a very strong, straightforward, forceful manner, and I think that with a great success. And many of the people that were responsible for it, I can say so, not because I was the prime minister. You know, prime minister, you know the famous series of the British television, Yes, Prime Minister. Prime Minister says yes. But these guys, a chief of staff, the head of Mossad, the head of intelligence, they tell you what to do, and if you're smart enough, you do. And sometimes, if you are smarter, you tell them what to do also. In any event, I think that we know how to deal with terror. And by the way, I think that we know better how to deal with terror when we deal with terror from within the boundaries which are recognized by the international community to be Israeli borders. Which means that those who say that if we will eventually pull out in order to allow the establishment of a Palestinian state next to the state of Israel, the borders will be indefensible. I say that the borders will be defensible because we know how to deal with terror better when we are within boundaries which the international community absolutely agrees to be ours. Then there is no international criticism, then there is no UN against us, and then we have the necessary time in order to do what needs to be done in order to protect ourselves. But first, the second threat is the Iranian issue. And I want to be very short. I disagree with those who say that we have already arrived, or that the Iranians have arrived at the red line that was drawn by the Israeli Prime Minister in his famous appearance in the United Nations. I think that they are not there. I think that we have exaggerated for a long time, not in the potential threat of Iran possessing a nuclear power. I never overlooked this threat, and I think that the government, at the time that I was Prime Minister, and some of the people sitting here could say a few things about it, did no less than any government in the history of the State of Israel to deal effectively with this threat. And as I think I say somewhere, when I was a member of the Select Committee of Cabinet Ministers in 2003, and some of the top analysts of the Israeli intelligence and of the different agencies came to the cabinet and said to us that in the year 2008 and at the latest 2009, the Iranians will have a nuclear capacity. We took it very seriously. Now we are in the middle of 2013, and they still don't have it. And they don't have it not only because of their failures. Perhaps someone helped them to fail. And of course, since I didn't read about it in the foreign press, I'm not certain that I know who helped them. So I don't take it lightly. However, when the President of the United States of America, when the Secretary of Defense, when the Secretary of State, the three of them, in 2 weeks' time, one after the other, say publicly, officially, and formally that America will not allow Iran to be nucleared. Full stop. Time and again, I think that we have to take them seriously, and I suggest to the Iranians that they will take them seriously. I think that President Obama doesn't want to be seen as someone whose legacy may be a nuclear Iran. I don't think that Chuck Hagel wants it. I don't think that John Kerry wants it. I don't think that the military guys in America want it. And I don't think that anyone will be able to come to them and say to them, you guys said here and there, time and again, that Iran will not be nucleared, and here it is. This is a presidential commitment of the highest order, and I accept it as such, and I suggest that we will continue to work closely, intimately, and quietly with the United States of America, rather than use every platform in order to explain to the United States what it needs to do. One must understand, not that we don't have the right to argue even with the presidents. I had the privilege last Wednesday to spend almost an hour and a half with President Bush. He invited me to the inauguration of his library. And prior to the ceremonies, he asked me and my wife to come and spend time with Laura and himself in the new center. And we were talking about many things, including about what we read. We don't know. I'm sure that Meir Dagan and Gabi Ashkenazi don't know anything about it. But we read in the foreign press that at some point in 2007, Israel destroyed an atomic reactor in Syria. So, you know, we were talking about it. And the president said, this is what the president says. He wrote it in his book. That's why I would share it with you publicly. Otherwise, it will not be, appropriate. But he wrote it in his book. There he talked to me, and he said that of all the options that were considered, American military operation, Israeli military operation, diplomatic operation, he suggested that there would be a diplomatic operation. And then he said, 2 minutes later, you bombed the atomic reactor. You didn't listen to me. So I looked at the president and I said, Mr. President, I recently read an article by Elliot Abraham, who was one of your assistants, and he said he was sitting in the room when you talked to me on the telephone, and he was stunned when you said to me what you said, and that my answer was that I'll do what Israel needs to do, and I said goodbye. And instead of saying to you, Mr. President, I will think, I will come back to you, no, you said right away. That's what he writes. And then he says that the president, instead of saying something harsh about the response that he got from the prime minister, according to the foreign press, he said, I like this guy. And he says that I'm afraid that deep down the president actually may have wanted the Prime Minister to do what he did, which I don't know. But this is true about Syria. Situation with Iran is different. America quietly, explicitly, publicly say time and again, hey guys, be patient. We are responsible. We are friendly enough, supportive enough, dependent enough on the United States of America to trust the commitments made by the President and the heads of his administration when they say that they will not allow Iran to have nuclear power. And therefore, we should work with them and not against them. We should work together with the United States, with care, with wisdom, and quietly. We don't need to embarrass the President by public statements, but rather deal with him intimately, even if we disagree with him. I didn't always agree with President Bush. I never embarrassed him publicly. And to this day, I thank him for the friendship, for the commitment, for the dedication, and for the love for the State of Israel that he has manifested at the time that he was President of the United States of America. So what do we have to do? Number one, we have to deal with the economy. The economy of Israel. I know that Mr. Steinitz is here, Dr. Steinitz, and he was, in my mind, a very good minister of the Treasury, and a man with enormous capacity to study, an area which he was not involved with all his political career or all his public career. But there are difficulties. Part of them are a result of the economic crisis in the world. You know the famous story of Levi Eshkol when he was Prime Minister. One day his advisors came to him and they say to him, Mr. Prime Minister, we are in a big, big, big trouble. He asked him, what is this trouble? They say to him, Prime Minister, we have drought. He said, oh, God forbid. Where is the drought? They said in Israel. He said, thank God. I asked him, why? He said, I was afraid it was in America. So, when there is a crisis in America, and when there is a crisis in Europe, there may be also a crisis in Israel. And that doesn't mean that the basic strategy of the economy was wrong. There were some mistakes, some dramatic mistakes, mostly in the use of money for some security priorities which were inappropriate in my mind and which I think now should change dramatically. And I trust that the new Minister of Finance, an able, dynamic, energetic, and dedicated young man, Mr. Lapid, will do what needs to be done, and that the Prime Minister will assist him, and that the government will necessarily make the changes in order to cut the budget, to reduce the deficit dramatically, starting with the security budget because of the reasons that I've outlined before, that we don't have to face in the near future the kind of challenges that require additional budgets, but rather that we can take the risk of reducing that budget, not because we are unaware of the security needs, but because we can afford at the present time to change it in order to cope with other problems, education, welfare, the status of the middle classes in the state of Israel, and the fact that lots of Israelis are making only, they are registered as workers, but they are making the minimal amount of salary, which is not sufficient in order to provide them with reasonable living, without which there will not be social stability in the state of Israel in the next couple of years, and we have to deal with it. So there has to be a dramatic change in the social and economic priorities in the state of Israel, starting with the reducing dramatically of the security budget and increasing the education budget, the welfare budget, and to be reasonably responsible about the tax policy. Now, there is one area where the government policy, I think, is completely, dramatically inadequate. And this policy is in the most important point in the life and the future of the state of Israel. And this is the relations between us and the Palestinians. I know that some of you may slightly disagree with me, but please listen to me. When the Prime Minister of Israel says, as he said, even though he said it vaguely, even though it wasn't as explicit as he sometimes knows how to speak. You know, there were many accusations against the Prime Minister of Israel, Mr. Netanyahu. I think that he is one of the most eloquent speakers, not just in Israel, but in the international community. And when he wants something to be understood, he knows how to say it in a manner which will be understood. His position about the two-state solution is somewhat vague. It's not as eloquent and as explicit as he can make it. And yet we know that it has to be, because this is the only possible solution for the future of the state of Israel as a Jewish and democratic state, not because we care for the Palestinians, not because we worry for their future, because we worry for the state of Israel, we worry for the nature of the state of Israel, we worry for the fact that in few years there will not be a majority of Jews living in the state of Israel. And that there is no way that we can deal with it other than by splitting, not because all of the land between the Jordan and the sea is not Jewish. It is Jewish historically, it always was, it always will be, but you give up some of what you possess, not because you love to do it, but because there is the only way that you can do in order to save the life of your country as a Jewish and democratic state. And this is what we are, and we can't be anything else but a Jewish and democratic state. And to my regret, there is not a policy that can lead to it in the state of Israel today. Let's face it. You like it, you don't like it, there is not a policy. The Israeli government can't eat the cake and have it, because at the end, the possible outcome may be disastrous to the national strategic interest of the state of Israel. We will be isolated in the world by almost all nations that we care for, not because they hate us, not because they're anti-Semitic, but because they don't want to have Israel as an occupier of millions of people that don't share with us equal rights in a democratic state. Everyone can boo for it, but this is a reality. We can't. I told you, I think before, that I know that today you will agree with me much more than last time, but I couldn't anticipate that you will agree with me so much. So thank you very much. Anyway, the international community, I'll just remind you, the international community, when we were attacking the Hamas 4.5 years ago in 2008, at the end of the Israeli operation in Gaza, all of the leaders of Europe came to the home of the Prime Minister and congratulated Israel for attacking the Hamas in Gaza and expressed the support for the right of Israel to defend itself, right? They did it. These are the countries that we say are against the state of Israel automatically. No, they are not. What they don't agree with is the lack of a active peace policy that will prove that Israel is prepared to change the realities in the Middle East and that Israel is prepared to make concessions, even if these are painful concessions that some of us are not happy to make, but will have to make it, will have to go forward and offer it, will have to sit down to the table with some that are not members of Likud, not even members of the moderate part of Likud. They are Palestinian patriots. They want to have a Palestinian state. We have to split the land in order to allow them to have their state, in order to allow Israel to have a Jewish state, and in order to allow the Israeli government, to continue the dialogue that it has with the international community. What can I tell you? You know, life is somewhat complex. One morning you wake up and you have to beat the terrorists, and I did it with more determination, longer, tougher, and maybe more brutal than any of the prime ministers before or after me. Okay, why don't you boo me? But one morning you have to wake up and to ask yourself, what am I leaving for my children and my grandchildren? A reality of endless war, a reality of endless confrontation, a reality of endless blood that will destabilize the life of the people in our country, or a glimpse of hope that things will be different, that there may be a chance, and that if there is a chance, that we will not be the ones that missed it because of short-sightedness, because of prejudices, or because of genuine beliefs that must be faced with the reality that will not allow these beliefs to be fulfilled as we have dreamt for so many years. This is what we have to face. I ask myself whether the government of Israel of today is prepared to deal with the most crucial, delicate, sensitive, painful, demanding and challenging problem, which is the future relations between us and the Palestinians. I'll tell you what. And you may ask me, how do I know? I know because I am observing reality. 3 years ago, I said the Prime Minister of Israel, of course, will apologize to the Turks. Everyone said to me, how do you know? I said, I know him. He will apologize. The problem is that when he will apologize, then what could be adequate and sufficient 3 years ago will not be sufficient after 3 years ago. Did it happen? Yes. Now I'll tell you something. This Prime Minister will say what I say today. Who knows, maybe in 3 years' time. Let's pray and hope that when he will say that, it will not be too late. Thank you very much. And of course, two short things. Number one, thank you for the friendly, patient, restrained, and supportive manner in which you received me. You know, I'm seriously considering running in America for the next political job. That's number one. Number two, due to my short memory, you know, and my failing memory, I forgot to mention two distinguished guests that are present here, which I'd like very much to mention. Number one is the distinguished, successful, charming, great ambassador of Israel to the United Nations, Ambassador Ron Pusor, who represents Israel with determination and vigor and dedication. And I'll tell you something, some people that watched him perform in the United Nations said, hey, I mean, this is a position where from you become Prime Minister of Israel. So who knows what this guy has in his mind? But anyway, Ron Pusor, thank you on behalf of the people of Israel for the great job that you're doing. And also, we have here a very dear friend of mine and an extraordinary human being, Rona Ramon. Rona Ramon will be speaking to you today about how did she, with enormous inner strength and emotional power, dealt with the unlimited pain that she is going through in order to give meaning to her life and to the community of which she is a part. Please listen to her carefully and join her in her efforts, which are extraordinary and which deserve the overwhelming support of all of us. Thank you very much.